that to me revealed that risk that you take can be less scary than staying in one place. What they're to talk about is your core, the thing that is so core to you that it drove you to develop the skills that enabled you to do the tasks. That is your core. That is what you need.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another very special, as always, episode of Next Level University, where we teach you how to level up your life, your love, your health, and your wealth. We have a very special guest today. He is the editor-in-chief of Entrepreneur Magazine, a podcast host like us, a book author, keynote speaker, startup advisor, and a nonstop optimism machine, the one and only Jason Feifer. Jason, what's going on, my friend?
I am so happy to be here. That was a wonderful, energetic introduction. I appreciate it.
I appreciate the compliment. I told Alan before in the preamble that Jason has energy, and I'm going to have to bring it. So
you brought it.
I had to make sure I brought it. So, Jason, obviously you're at a great part in your career, and you've found a lot of success, and it looks like a lot of fulfillment. I was watching an interview of yours where you were talking about early in your career where you were at a newspaper. Mm-hmm. And you had this moment where you realized that the trajectory of where you were going was more scary than the uncertainty of trying something new. Can you talk to us about that? And how did you take yourself out of the picture to see the whole picture? Because I feel like that's a hard thing to do.
It is a hard thing to do. So let me give the setup here.
Please.
I started my career at a tiny little newspaper called the Gardner News in north central Massachusetts. At the time, and we're talking 2002, it was a 6,000 circulation daily newspaper. Who knows what it is now? But anyway, I'll tell you what was going on in that town and in that newspaper. The answer is nothing. Nothing was happening. And I was just miserable, honestly. I had these dreams that were very unformed, but I knew that I wanted to work at a high level, and I knew I wanted to write big, important things that reached lots of people. And I didn't know what I wanted, but I knew that it was bigger than what I had. And after being there for about a year, I came to this realization, and it was that nobody at the places that I wanted to work at, the New York Times, the Washington Post, none of them ever were going to read this little newspaper and see my story about the local diner or the middle school play or something and say, you know what? We're going to call that kid. We're going to bring him in. We're bringing him up. Because why would they do that? That wouldn't make any sense. I was just working at a level that seemed completely beneath the level that I really wanted to be at. And while I believed that I belonged at a different level, I wasn't doing anything to prove it. And I wasn't going to those people and proving myself to them. You cannot sit around and just wait for people to come to you. This is what I realized. And so you nicely put that I realized that the actual path I was on was scarier than the risk that I had to take, because the actual path that I was on, I knew it. I saw other colleagues. It was to work at this job and then to eventually get another job at a slightly larger newspaper and then get another job at a slightly larger newspaper and just like do that and do that and do that and do that and do that forever. And I don't mean to poo-poo that for people who have followed that path. There are a lot of people who really love local news, but it just was not for me. And so I quit. And I sat in my bedroom, cheapo place, $500 a month, literally next to a graveyard in a tiny town. And I just pitched. I just went to the people at the very top, and I had to prove myself. And it took a long time, but I did. I landed stories in the New York Times and the Washington Post, and I proved to myself that the way forward was to go to them, was to never expect that somebody would just see you. And that to me revealed that risk that you take can be less scary than staying in one place.
Now, back then, you didn't even know Entrepreneur, the magazine, like that wasn't an option for you, right? So how did that go from there to you saying like, I want bigger? And then like, what were the goals that you were setting that actually brought you to where you are today?
You know, I think that if you set some absurd goal and then define yourself by whether or not every decision that you make is reaching that specific goal, you just cut off all of these other opportunities that'll come along. It would have made absolutely no sense for me to say back in 2002, my goal is to be editor-in-chief of Entrepreneur Magazine. I mean, none of that made any sense. I could have never conjured that sentence. Instead, what I did was start to set goals based on improvement and an awareness of the skill sets that I was missing. So instead, I said, look, I know that I want to build myself. I don't know exactly where I'm going to go. What do I need to be doing right now to create momentum? I became obsessed with this word momentum, just the question of momentum. Am I moving? Do I have momentum? And so I stepped back and I thought, what do I need to do in order to move forward? The first thing from back then was, well, I need to prove to people that I can work at a high level, which means that I got to learn how to write at a high level. But then also I'm going to need to learn some other skills. I'm going to need to learn editing. I'm going to need to learn short form writing, long form writing. And as I progressed through my career, I came to this concept that I didn't know how to articulate back then, but now I call work your next job. And in short, it goes like this, Kevin, Alan, everyone who's listening, you all right now and at any time in your life and career, you have two sets of opportunities in front of you. Opportunity set A, opportunity set B. Opportunity set A is everything that's asked of you during your day. You show up at your job. What does your boss want? What are the things you're measured on? That's opportunity set A. Do a good job. Opportunity set B is all the things that are available to you that nobody is asking you to do. And that can be at your job, but it also can be out of your job. Again, what's available to you that nobody's asking you to do? I started a podcast. Nobody asked me to start that. That wasn't really a thing that was connected to a job. I just did it. I've been doing these things throughout my career because I came to realize that pushing myself to develop new skills inside or outside my job was ultimately the key to progress. And so while I started to, what does this mean? This means showing up at work and figuring out what do people need from me and how can I do it as efficiently as possible so that I can start to move some of this time and resources towards opportunity set B, learning something else. Oh, I work at Fast Company now and they started a video department and nobody's asking me to be a part of the video department, but I figure that if I am, I'll learn video and then I'll be good on camera and then who knows what'll come from that. That became more important to me. And so I started to develop it that way. And that is what led me to editor-in-chief of Entrepreneur Magazine. I never saw it out there, but I knew that if I focus on growth, if I focus on momentum, good things will come.
Regarding your dream, and you seem like someone who had dreams from a young age.
Yeah.
And your dreams have brought you, again, like you're describing, it's like it wasn't a clear, specific be editor-in-chief of Entrepreneur Magazine, but you did have a dream within the facet of journalism, right? What was your dream back then versus what is it now, and how has that evolved?
So when I started, I was very narrow in my thinking. I'm a newspaper writer. What do I want to be? A more successful newspaper writer. I want to be a reporter for the New York Times. And then the more I learned about what that even means, I started to think, well, I want to be a national reporter at the time. I want to be a newspaper columnist. And then I realized that newspapers weren't for me. And that was actually pretty disorienting because imagine defining yourself by a specific job and then you take the job away. What are you? Now you're nothing. And then I did it again with magazines. What do I want to be? I want to be a magazine editor. I want to be a magazine feature writer. I want to be one of these guys like Tom Janode, who's just like known as a great magazine writer. And, eventually those opportunities, I don't know, they just didn't evolve for me. They weren't, maybe I didn't have the right attitude for it or the skill set or what, who knows? But, I was making my way through magazines, but I wasn't some rock star. And I eventually came to realize that I was making a mistake. And the mistake that I was making was that I was defining myself too narrowly. I was defining myself by my skills. I was defining myself by what I do instead of why I do it. And so I started to think, and it was really, I don't know, unconscious at the time, or it was abstract. I've come now to a little exercise, which I'll share with you in a moment, about how to do this. But I started to realize I need to drill in deeper to what it is that I really am and want to do. I need to give myself some clarity that doesn't hinge on whatever job I have or whatever particular next step I need to take. And I came to this phrase for myself. And that phrase is, I tell stories in my own voice. And there are two important components there. I tell stories, which is different from I write magazines articles or I write newspaper articles. I tell stories. That can be anything. You take away my magazine job, I can still tell stories. And then in my own voice, I became less and less interested in writing in someone else's voice. Sometimes you work at a magazine and your job is to inhabit the voice of that magazine. I worked at Men's Health for a while. I was a men's health writer. I don't want to do that anymore. I want to tell stories in my own voice. I have my own perspective. And that really liberated me to build a career that brought together so many different ways of communicating and to really encourage me and liberate me to tell my own story and my own perspective and share it in my own voice. And so here's what I would suggest that other people do. I want you to run a scenario 3 times in your head. So same scenario, slightly different each time. Scenario is this. Somebody comes up to you at a party and they ask what you do. First time, somebody comes up to you at a party, asks what you do. And what are you going to answer? Well, you're going to answer with your skills or your job, the things you do every day. What do you do? I'm a newspaper reporter. I show up at an office and I write newspaper stories and they're published. Okay, cool. Second, somebody comes up to you at a party, asks what you do. Can't answer with anything that you just said. Cannot be talking about the tasks that you do. So what are you going to talk about next? You're going to talk about your skills. What do you do? Well, I go around and I talk to people, I gather information, and I process it in a way that's useful for other people, and I write it down. That's what I do. Okay? Now, let's do it one more time. What are we doing? We're drilling past all the things that we generally associate ourselves with, and we're going to get to something deeper because we're taking it off the table. Let's express it, and now let's say, okay, we put it out there, now it's off the table. We can't talk about it again. It's already there. Somebody comes up to a party, and they ask what you do. You can't talk about your skills. You can't talk about your tasks. What is there to talk about? What there to talk about is your core. Your core. The thing that is so core to you that it drove you to develop the skills that enabled you to do the tasks. That is your core. That is what you need. You need to identify that. I tell stories in my own voice. That is my core. Everybody's going to have something different, but I want you to come up with that for yourself. It could be a simple sentence. It starts with I. And the point of it is that you identify something that is not changeable based on one simple change. You lose your job. You start to do something different. You have a somewhat different interest set. Doesn't matter. You can still express yourself with your core. Your core is still stable. And once you have that, then every other change in your life suddenly becomes less significant.
Jason, did that core never change? I used to ask this, we're 700 episodes in, and so we've done a lot of interviews, and I used to ask this every single time back when we were the Hyperconscious podcast. We've since rebranded. I used to ask, what about you never changed? Because that's your truth. Did this core never change, even though you weren't aware of it?
Well, I wouldn't have had that core at the very beginning of my career. And the reason for that is because I didn't know what my voice was. So I tell stories in my own voice. What is my voice? Who am I? What do I have to tell you? I don't know. I mean, if you go back to the Gardner News archives of 2002, which I suggest you don't, you will find this terrible, like op-ed column, like politics op-ed column. I thought I was going to be a political commentator. It was terrible. So I wouldn't, I didn't know what my voice was. So no, I would say that it evolved, but I think that's great. I mean, I think of it almost like there's a big ugly thing that you pull out of the ground, and you chisel away at it, and you find a stone in the middle. And so your core can change too, but I think that it changes in a different way. I would say that it evolves and it refines, whereas the tasks you do can radically change, right? If I make a magazine right now. Is one of the things that takes up my days is I make a nationally distributed magazine. But after this call that we're all having, my boss could call me and he could say, you know what, we're done with you. We're moving in a different direction. And then suddenly I am not making a nationally distributed magazine. That can change real fast. But something like my core, it can evolve slowly over time. But my boss can call me. But what my boss cannot do after our call is he cannot call me and say, you no longer tell stories in your own voice. He can't tell me to do that. Nobody can tell me to do that. I'm in control of that.
Hi, I'm Johanna Annunziata. I'm a high school English teacher. And last week I had the honor of having Kevin and Alan in to inspire my students through podcasting. My students, sophomores in high school, they are creating their own podcast called Perspectives with a Purpose. So Next Level University, big time podcasters Kevin and Alan, were able to come into the classroom and really share their purpose and share their why, and just inspire and impact my students on their journey. It was not only beneficial through podcasting and learning like the ins and outs of podcasting, but it was also just amazing to have both of them, powerful souls, super mindful, to just be able to share like, hey, this is why we started our podcast, and being really hands-on with the students to motivate them to understand like this is not going to be easy work, but it's going to be impactful work, and to just help them be the best version of themselves through this journey. Can't wait to have Alan and Kevin back in the classroom. I definitely know that they're going to continue helping us through perspectives with a purpose. So thank you, Alan and Kevin. You two are amazing souls, and I appreciate you.
It's a great distinction for our listeners. Sorry,
It
Kev.
is. No, you're good.
If you don't mind, I'll go one layer deeper real quick.
Yeah,
That's cool.
Yeah.
So, Jason, when you were not living from that core, did you feel unfulfilled in hindsight looking back?
I talked to this memory researcher recently for an episode of my podcast, Build for Tomorrow, about how we understand our past selves. And she says we do this thing where we downshift our pasts because it makes us feel good. We naturally want a story of ourselves of progress. We want to think that we are progressing. And so when you track people over time and you have them rate their experiences over a long period of time, and then you ask them to reflect upon those experiences, what you find is that they think back to things in their past as harder or more challenging or less fulfilling than they actually ranked them at the time, which is very interesting, isn't it? Wow. And so I don't exactly know how to answer your question, because I think that I'll probably just be making up a story of myself that I'm then telling you. I think that at the time I was waking up every day and just proving to myself that I could get better. I knew that I was staring up a mountain, and the big difference, I suppose, between that portion of my career and the portion that I'm at now is that portion of my career, it was fairly clear what the mountain was, right? I mean, once I made the shift from newspapers to magazines, I knew I wanted to rise in magazines. There's a whole world of magazines. I didn't know what magazines I would work at. I didn't know exactly what the path upwards were, but like I knew what it looked like to be at the top of magazines, and I kind of wanted to get there. And so I think that I measured myself every day by whether or not I was doing things that felt like I was taking steps up of that mountain. The weird thing about my experience, my life now, is that the next phase of the mountain is a little less clear. All right, I'm at the top of a magazine. I kind of reached the top of that mountain, but of course there is no top of the mountain. The mountain just keeps going up. And so now the mountain looks different for me, because now I have all sorts of different opportunities in front of me: book writing, speaking, television. Now I have all these calls or talking about television projects. What is it going to look like? I don't know. It's a much more abstract thing, but I still feel very grounded because I feel like I have developed a sense of me, and I want to maximize that in as many ways as I can. And so that at once creates this feeling of I don't know exactly what the next step is, and I know exactly what I'm doing, and I'm living between those two things.
Jason, you said you developed a sense of you, and I was going to ask about self-awareness, because it seems like you have a very high level of self-awareness of what you're good at and maybe what your weaknesses are.
Yeah.
How important is that as an entrepreneur to say, like, look, Alan's just better at numbers than I am, and I'm not going to catch up. That's okay. I'm better at relating to the masses than Alan is, and he is catching up, and that is a possibility. But like owning your strengths and weaknesses as an entrepreneur, why is that so important, and what have you learned from that?
I remember talking to this guy named Greg Fleischman, who is very successful in the natural food space in particular. And he had been approached by these two women a number of years ago, one of whom is Sarah Michelle Gellar, Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And they were building this company called Foodsters. It started as a baking mix company, and it has since expanded. And because he has such a deep background in this space, they wanted him to come on as a co-founder. And I asked him what it was about them that convinced him to do it, because he did. I believe he's the CEO now. And he said that one of the most important things were, and I loved this phrase that he used. He didn't come up with it. It's from it's probably a military phrase, but situational awareness. He said that they had great situational awareness. They understood exactly what their strengths were, and they understood exactly what they were weak in, and they were approaching him because they had made a determination that he was strong where they were weak. And that's why he joined, because he felt like these are co-founders who understand balance and teamwork and how to put people together for a greater whole. And he also felt like, he has his own situational awareness, and those two filled in gaps that he didn't have. And so it was a great match. And I've heard versions of that from entrepreneurs in every possible way. If you are not aware of what you are not good at, you're going to compound problems, because you're not going to be good at something. You're going to think you're good at it, and then you're going to make even more bad decisions. Sometimes the greatest revelation that an entrepreneur makes, and I've heard this from many people, including, I think, most famously, Mark Randolph, who was the original CEO of Netflix, that sometimes the greatest thing that ever happens to them is when they finally become aware of what they are bad at, because conversely, they find what they're good at. So Mark Randolph was the first CEO of Netflix. He'd co-founded it with Reed Hastings. And one day, a couple years in, Reed Hastings comes to his office and is like, "Look, I have a proposal for you. And the proposal is you step down as CEO." And, that's not something that anybody wants to hear, but Reed made a compelling case. And the compelling case, more or less went like this: you are an amazing visionary and you're great at getting things off the ground, but you're not a growth CEO. And so that's why we're leveling out right now. And it's time for a growth CEO to come in, which Reed Hastings believed he was, and has certainly proven himself to be. And Mark, that was a bitter pill to swallow. But what he ultimately came to realize is, Reed is right. And there's nothing wrong with not being the growth CEO. I'm the guy who can get something off the ground. That's an amazing skill. It's a tremendous skill and a very valuable one. And so he stepped down, and he has since built a career helping people get off the ground and be visionaries and do the thing that he is best at doing. And that's fantastic. Nobody said Shaquille O'Neal is a crappy basketball player because he can't shoot 3-pointers. Nobody asked him to shoot 3-pointers. He's really good at slam dunks. And so let's let him do that, and he will transform a team because of it.
I love it.
Fire. Jason, this is a question that I love to ask people that are in a specific industry. And it's, what would outsiders, our listeners, and Kevin and myself, people that are outside of the industry of magazines, what might we not know? What do people not know unless you're on the inside?
Oh, there's probably so much. So could do a whole other episode on that. Well, look, I think that practically speaking, because I could bore you with all the nonsense about what it's like to work at a magazine. It's not nearly as glamorous as you think, but the practical thing that you should know, because for most people in business, when they think of magazines, they're probably thinking, how can I get in the magazine? And so what you need to understand is that people who work at magazines are not, and certainly don't think of themselves as, service providers. So they're not there to give you press. And I get so many pitches that don't seem to understand that. They reach out to me and they think that I am a service provider. They ask how to get a feature. How can I get a feature in your magazine? Which is, to me, like, how can I get a hamburger at your hamburger stand? But I don't answer that question because I don't sell hamburgers. Right? And so what you need to understand is what these people who work at magazines or newspapers or, legitimate websites or whatever, what they actually are doing. And what they are doing is that they are serving their audience, serving their readers, or serving their listeners. And they're doing that in a very specific way, which is going to be different per publication. But what they come to work every day to do is to find information that their audience is going to find valuable, and then deliver that information in the way that it's going to be most valuable to their audience. They don't really care about you, the person who's pitching them, unless the information that you're sharing very clearly is useful in the way that they believe their audience wants to be receiving this information. So Don't reach out and say, how can I get a feature in your magazine? Or I would love, it would be so helpful if I got a feature in your magazine. They don't care about that. That's not their job. Instead, understand what it is that they're doing and the way that they're serving their audience, and then come to them with a pitch that makes it very clear how you are a fit for them.
All right. We got to go in a couple of minutes. Last question. Quick one, Jason. We're at the supermarket.
Yeah.
And we're in the aisle of intangibles. Which 3 intangible attributes do you grab off the shelf for the ideal entrepreneur?
Boy, what a metaphor. It took me on a ride. I was like pesto and 3. Okay. Well, I'm gonna punt a little bit because I think that situational awareness that we talked about earlier has to be one of them. And then right next to that on the shelf is going to be adaptability, which I think is just the most critical thing that any entrepreneur can have. And then finally, let's see, right next to the cheeses and the dried fruit is vulnerability. I think that your team will support you more. Your fans will love you more if you are open about your challenges.
Wonderful.
Wow. I didn't expect that. That's fire.
I
Awesome.
didn't either. Jason,
Awesome.
we're gonna have to do a round 2 in the future. This went by so incredibly fast. You added a ton of value, and I'm grateful you took the time. Where can people find you? I was listening to your podcast earlier.
Same.
Love it.
Thanks.
It's very interesting. It's different than most. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Where can people find out more about the podcast and you?
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. So look, I'll tell you to do 2 things. Number one, so that podcast is called Build for Tomorrow. It is not a conversation show. I spend a month making each episode, and what I do is I try to dive into some story we tell ourselves that holds us back from progress, and then basically research it into the ground, talking to historians, to scientists, to understand why it is incorrect. Everything from our belief that we're addicted to technology, which we're not, and if you're ready to argue with me about that, then go listen to the episode, to why our narrative of the good old days is incorrect and holds us back, to stuff about memory, like I talked about earlier. So anyway, it's called Build for Tomorrow. It's super fun, and I hope that it makes you feel more resilient about the future, because that's its goal. And then also you can go to my website, which is jasonfeifer.com, and you will see a button. You can't miss it. It's the first call to action to download a free audio training that I have put together about how to become more adaptable. So if you like the stuff that you've heard here about how to become more adaptable, how to be more optimistic about the future, then that free audio course is going to be for you.
We will link all of that in the show notes below, where you can find Jason. Jason, I know you got to pop off, brother. Thank you so much. This was amazing. I know our listeners will love this.
You bet. Hey, thanks a lot, guys. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Jason. Talk soon.